Iowa Hoops had a chance of picking up a signature win. They fell short. Let it slip away late against Iowa State. We react, and we got some portal news today. Locked on Hawkeyes.
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We're available wherever you find podcasts. If you're listening, hit a 5-star review, or you can watch us on YouTube. While you're there, hit the subscribe button. All helps us get in front of more Hawkeye fans. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, made it to Carver-Hawkeye Arena for the first time this year. Hung out with some friends, did my radio show over at Jethro's in Iowa City. Had a great time outside of the final couple minutes of the game as it slipped away from the Hawkeyes. But, I want to start here first. As before we get into the game, we got some portal news coming your way as well. We'll get to that a little bit later in the program here today. But I want to start with what we saw inside the arena. And getting to Carver for the first time this season, it's still special to me. It is. I don't get over very often. Not able to make the trip. Got kids' activities. Got a lot going on, right? And I know I'm not alone. But I get to a point, and I'm as guilty as anybody. But this Iowa basketball team is fun. They're fun to watch. And yeah, there are plenty of things to complain about. There are plenty of things to get upset about. But to see a game like this, to see a game against a conference foe, against an in-state foe, a rivalry game, and to have 2,500 empty seats, it's unthinkable. For somebody like me that grew up in the 80s, somebody now in my mid-40s, and where Iowa basketball was it, that was the thing. There was nothing else during the wintertime to watch. You got Monday Night Football till the end of the regular season, and then on Thursday nights back then, you got Iowa basketball. And we'd spend the whole week talking about what happened the previous weekend, get ready for the game against Thursday. And then Friday we come to school, and that's what we talk about. That's what it was, because if you're like me and you didn't have cable, you had 3 channels, that was your sport viewing option. Iowa basketball. And that was it. And it was a big deal. And to see a fan base that has checked out on the Fran McCaffrey experience, even with the successes that he has, I get it. Hasn't made the second weekend. Okay. It's a one-and-done scenario. They've been upset a couple of times. Bracket hasn't fallen their way. Haven't had an upset in front of them. All these different things. But it's a reality. They are what they are. Make the tournament more times than not. Maybe win a game, and that's it. And I understand that kind of frustration. But when you have an environment like that, where you got 3, 4, 5,000 Iowa State fans in the building, the crowd was revved up. It was a fun environment. Are people just that checked out on Fran McCaffrey that they're not willing to support the program that they love, the university that they love? I can't wrap my mind around it. I really can't. How this many people have checked out. I know you want more. We all want more. But you show up for football. You show up for women's basketball. You show up for wrestling. You show up for everything. And my concern is, as we've seen this happen more and more and more, and attendance started to slip under Alford, and then it cratered during Todd Licklider. And here we are today at a program that's solid. Not great, but a solid program. And people are this checked out. I know attendance in college basketball is something that is struggling really across the board. This is not just a specific Iowa problem. It's happening in a lot of other places. But boy, I wonder whenever Fran McCaffrey, his era at Iowa comes to an end, be it after this year, 5 years from now, whenever it does, how much of the fan base is just completely checked out from men's basketball? And I know another component for a lot of people was the introduction 15 years ago of the Big Ten Network. And so many people for years, I mentioned me growing up, that was it on the Hawkeye Television Network. It didn't matter if you're in Sioux City or North Iowa watching on Mason City or Eastern Iowa or Southern Iowa. You got the game. You had the game every single time. It was on. And you don't have that anymore. You're looking around and it's streaming, and now it's BTN Plus, and people, their ability in Des Moines to flip it on and you know the channel, you know the time, and it's going to be there. And how much that has lost of the fan base. An aging fan base, I think that's a component too. Carver was good last night. It was a great environment. Even with a couple thousand empty seats there, the environment was not a problem. Let's show up. Let's support this team, though. And I'm going to do that more. I'm going to take the kids over a couple of times. I need to get there more often myself. That's on me as well. I'm not alone. I'm not calling you out, but let's do it. Because this team is fun. This team has a different feel to it. And I've talked about that a lot throughout the course of this season. I've talked about this squad with the additions of Drew Thelwell and Seydou Traore, adding some athleticism. Drew Thelwell, that dude wants it. He's playing to the crowd. He's knocking down big shots. He was great last night. Drew Thelwell was outstanding. It's just the kind of point guard that they need. Brock Purdy had his moments, but also made an inexplicable pass. He sat on the bench for a good 5-8 minutes after that. He could do a lot of good things. And Brock Harding is a lot better than I thought he was going to be, certainly at this point in his career. He's a better defender than I ever anticipated he would be. He can make plays. He can get to the rim. Just don't make those big mistakes. Let's get into the game. And it opens up just absolutely incredible. Iowa starting out, and speaking of Drew Thelwell, that was a masterclass right there of Fran McCaffrey pushing the right buttons in the starting lineup. Something that he's not real want to do. We don't see Fran McCaffrey make a lot of changes in his lineup, especially this deep into the season. You don't see this happen very often unless there's an injury, unless his hand is kind of forced. It's not something he does, but he did here. And he did it against a team in Iowa State that has a couple of monster bigs. Jefferson and Jackson, those dudes are behemoths. They're big, they're skilled, and Iowa decided to go small, and it worked out incredibly well. You saw when they were able to pull them away from the rim, how uncomfortable those two bigs were for Iowa State, and Iowa was hitting shots. And when we talked about it yesterday, that was one part of the game. Now, it's a simple equation, right? You got to make shots to win. You absolutely have to make shots if you're going to win a basketball game. It goes without saying, but that was a component. Iowa needed to knock down three-pointers, and they did, certainly in the early portions of the game. Now, they finish 11-28. It's good. 39%, you would take that seemingly every single game. However, when you start 5-6 and you finish 11-28, that changes the equation just a little bit. You mentioned Thelwell. I think this is something that needs to happen going forward. He needs to be in the starting lineup. The love that he already has, you can tell, the passion that he plays with, having him is absolutely huge. I think at times they waited a little bit too long to do Seydou Traore, both in the first half and the second half. Would have liked him come in a little bit early. Basically came in about the 10-minute mark of both of them. But also remember, he's coming off a pretty significant ankle injury. And we just don't know, is there a limitation for him? If they really had to have him play 25 minutes in the game last night, would he even been physically able to do that? Not sure at this point. Need to see more Traore. Race out to the good start. And another thing that I loved about this until the end is every time that Iowa State would start to make a little run, Iowa had a response. Iowa had a bucket of their own or a stop of their own. They were able to get a bunch of stops. And there was one portion of the game, I think Iowa State had tied it up during the second half, something like 6 different times. And Iowa responded every time, and they weren't able to get over the hump until, well, eventually they did. We continue here, a rapid reaction to the Iowa loss to Iowa State in the Cy-Hawk game. What does this mean big picture? We'll get into that, talk a little bit more. We got some more stars to hand out in this one because it wasn't just Drew Thelwell. A lot of guys played well. I think a lot of positives to take away, and yet one big negative. We'll do that as we continue. Plus, a look at the transfer portal and what is happening on the Iowa football team. Got some guys in on visits. We'll talk about that as we continue. Locked On Hawkeyes. Today's episode of Locked On Hawkeyes is brought to you by Game Time and the Game Time app. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks. It makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Mentioned I was there last night. Absolutely love the environment at Carver-Hawkeye Arena. There is just something special about being there. And guess what? Good seats available and plenty of good seats available at a good price at Game Time. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different tickets. I love the all-in pricing, knowing exactly what your total is going to be up front. Toggle the feature, and it'll show you with all-in pricing what your fee is going to be. No more surprise fees at checkout. Plus, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you can buy. Make sure there's nothing in your way. You got a good spot. You can do that inside the Game Time app. The Game Time ticket coverage, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticking industry with Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Trent Conner back with you once again on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We talk about this game, a final 89-80. Doesn't tell the whole story of this one. It was missed opportunities, and that's where the frustration is going to come for this one, is Iowa down the stretch. 2 of 12 from the field in their final 12 attempts at it. They just went into a funk offensively, and they had good looks. That's the other part. It's not that the Iowa State defense just bottled them up, and it was they weren't able to get shots off, shot clock violations, throwing things up at the end of the shot clock. That's not what this was. They got good shots. Unfortunately, Peyton Sandford missed a bunch of them, and a lot of shots that he has made in the past. We know Peyton Sandford is an incredibly inconsistent shooter. He goes through highs and lows incredibly quickly. And what you'd like to see from him is when things aren't going, make that extra pass. Get it around. I continue to main Josh Dix. He just has to be more aggressive. Now, he gets 14 shots up, 5 of 14 from the floor. Not his best game shooting, but that's what you need. You need him to get shots up because more times than not, he's certainly going to be better than 5 of 14. Brock Harding, 4 of 10. Doesn't make a three-pointer, though. 0 of 3 from behind the arc. Does have 8 assists in the game. 4 assists out of Thelwell. Also, you have to talk about, though, what he was doing on the defensive end of the floor. Drew Thelwell did an outstanding job against Iowa State, and that Iowa State team that is led by, they got a bunch of weapons. We talked about, the big guys inside, but Keyshawn Gilbert was a guy being talked about National Player of the Year. He was in the top 10 at the rankings over at Ken Pomeroy for National Player of the Year, and they befuddled him. Absolutely took him out of it, and Drew Thelwell's defense was a big part of that. Also, Brock Harding's defense. He did a good job of him. 3 of 13 shooting, 1 of 5 from behind the arc. The problem, mentioned Jefferson inside, along with Jackson. Those guys were a problem. Also, it was a whole lot of the guys off the bench. Curtis Jones, who is a sixth man, but he plays starter minutes more times than not. He finishes with 5 3-pointers, 23 points in the game. He was able to get to the rim. And finally, the rebounding. And that has remained the big concern about this. I mean, you go through and you look at this box score and you watch the game last night. It was basically even. It really was. You go through the stat pack, you look at all the different things. Both teams shoot 44% from the floor. Both teams shoot 39% from 3. Iowa State, 16 of 22 at the free throw line. Iowa, 13 of 15. Both teams turn it over 9 times. The difference, 46 to 34 on the boards, including 18 offensive rebounds for Iowa State. There's your difference. Second chance points. And there were so many opportunities. I was just not a good rebounding team. I mean, there were times that they had position. There were a lot of times that they had the inside position, and Iowa State just out-jumped them. And just were more physical. Got to get tougher on the glass. Need more lift out of Owen Freeman. You need Traore to be able to come in and mix it up. Laje Dembele was great offensively. He did some good things. And Laje maybe had his best game, certainly of the season, and maybe of his career. Not just making shots. And yes, you look good when you're making shots, but he was active. And I think they have found something with him coming off the bench. And in the starting role, for whatever reason, it just wasn't clicking for him. This is what you do now going forward. Because Dembele was a big piece. Just got to rebound the ball better. I don't know. This team's not going to become a great rebounding team throughout the course of the year. I mean, that was another angle. We talked about hitting threes and rebounding, and Iowa wasn't able to do that in this one. When I look at the squad big picture, I mentioned why I still have hope. Because of Thelwell and Traore. The Big Ten this year is not great. Now, it's deep this season. I mean, there's a lot of different teams in the Big Ten this year that feel like right now they're going to be an NCAA tournament team. But there's no elite teams. UCLA is good, and I think they might be the most talented team in the Big Ten this year. With UCLA, though, I wonder what they're going to be able to do with that travel schedule that they're going to have. Michigan, we saw them. That's a good team. Big team. They're going to win a lot of games this year. Michigan State's going to be Michigan State. Indiana has talent. They also have a knucklehead as a coach. Illinois, going to be good. Purdue, solid. And then after that, you kind of get in this middle section where I was a part of. Maryland, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, Northwestern. These are all squads. You throw Nebraska, Rutgers in the mix, Wisconsin. You look through all these different teams, and they're all kind of the same. It's going to be who has a bad injury, who has a funk that lasts instead of a game, a couple of weeks. That's going to be the difference between this group of who's going to make the NCAA tournament. I was amongst that. And I really hope that we see this squad continue to build, get better on the boards. I like what we've seen out of them defensively. I like what we see out of this group. They're 91st in the country in defensive efficiency. And that normally sounds terrible, but that's improvement from where they've been. And I think there's enough there. Now, what Iowa has left throughout the course of the non-conference, just 3 games remaining. They play Sunday against New Orleans, ranked 343rd in the country, by the way. It is New Orleans. This is not the Pelicans coming to town. It's the Privateers. I was projected to win that game by 27. Then they get Utah up on the neutral court, up in Sioux Falls. I know there'll be a ton of Hawkeye fans from Western Iowa that'll make the trek out there and all over the place that'll go up for that one. That's a coin flip game. Iowa favored by 2 at Ken Pomeroy in that one, and then wrap up against New Hampshire. I think it's incredibly important for Iowa to finish it off. Get that win against Utah. You got a split in the openers of the Big Ten with the win against Northwestern and the loss to Michigan. And you go into the Final 18 then, sitting at 10-3, 1-1 in the Big Ten. And then it's going to be a race at minimum to get 9 more wins. And it needs to happen early. That's another thing you have to remember with this squad. Iowa needs to be rounding into form because late in the season, Iowa has an absolute gauntlet. 3 of their last 4 games are on the road, including going to Illinois, House of Horse, going to Northwestern, probably a little revenge after the way Iowa got them earlier this year. Your home game is against Michigan State. I think to wrap up at Nebraska, another place that Iowa struggled. 3 out of 4 on the road to wrap it up. So Iowa, to feel confident about them being an NCAA tournament team, I believe they need to go into that one probably sitting 9-7. I think to feel good going into that closing stretch and at least get one more win to get there. I think they will. I still believe in this team, and they're fun to watch. Support them. If you got the opportunity, get to Carver. Enjoy the team. If you don't like Fran, fine. Support this group. Support these kids. They're working. They're a fun squad to watch. Hope more people are able to get over there and we don't see some of the disappointments going forward. I know there won't be a lot of people there Sunday. There won't be a lot of people there on December 30th when they take on New Hampshire. But when they get the home games against Nebraska, they get a Saturday night game against Indiana. That used to be something that happened all throughout the course of the season. Doesn't happen very often. Iowa gets a Saturday night game against the Hoosiers. Those kind of games. That's what we need to see the crowd show up. You'll be there for women's basketball. You'll be there for wrestling. Let's get there. Support these kids on the men's team. We continue Locked On Hawkeyes, and let's get into some football talk. Football talk at the forefront, including a couple of portal targets that were in attendance at Carver-Hawkeye Arena last night, including the quarterback, Hank Brown. We'll talk about him and a little intel for you on that front. We continue on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Hawkeyes is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers, you can bet $5. You're going to get $150 in bonus bets if you win. Simple as that. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Look, you're watching the game. It's not just about the numbers. You get that feeling. And with the FanDuel Sportsbook app, you can jump aboard. You can look in the middle of the game, check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and then you can make your bet right there on the same page where you place your bets, all the information there in front of you on the FanDuel app. Just visit FanDuel.com today to get started, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. Wrapping things up with some football talk. So we we're in attendance as mentioned, and right away take a look over where the recruits normally are. And what do I see as soon as I peek down there? Well, a guy in a blue shirt standing in front of the recruits that were there, but see Hank Brown. And Hank Brown, the quarterback, is a player that I think is very exciting. A guy that start with the arm and the arm talent. And talking to a number of different people now, that is the thing, both in the scouting side of things, people that saw him at the high school level, began in Illinois, that's where he grew up, moved to Nashville to complete his season as COVID had wiped away the Illinois final year of high school football. So he made the move to Nashville, played for Trent Dilfer, one of the big prep academies there, was really successful. He committed to Liberty, and then when Hugh Freeze got the Auburn job, he went with Hugh Freeze to Auburn. This is a guy's a redshirt freshman. They got a couple of starts. I don't know the Arkansas game. It was bad. I went back and watched the highlights again. It was really bad. It looked like a young guy starting for the first time in the SEC. As a 19-year-old, that's what you got. But he could also see the arm talent, even with the mistakes that he was making there. In the previous start against New Mexico, he was really good, albeit against New Mexico. We'll put the caveat in there. I get that. But what you start with is the arm talent. And when you have arm talent like that, I think it's incredibly exciting. I really do. Iowa, when you're talking about difference makers at the quarterback position, they haven't had a big armed quarterback, really, since Nate Stanley. Yes, Spencer Petras had a big arm. The problem is he was terribly inaccurate. And with that inaccuracy and some of the what felt like mental blocks that he had at times, I mean, just chucking it into the turf, skipping it on an out route, overthrowing receivers by 5 yards, those kind of things. Doesn't matter what kind of arm you have when you're doing that. Hank Brown has the arm talent, and it's the kind of guy that Tim Lester has identified. That's another exciting component. We talked about this as it pertains to Jackson Stratton. This is a guy that nobody wanted. Absolutely nobody wanted Jackson Stratton. He was sitting there with not just an offer, an opportunity after he decided to transfer from Colorado State. Tim Lester went, saw him throw, liked enough to at least offer him a walk-on opportunity. And we saw. Is he great? No. Is he going to be great? Probably not. But you find a guy like that off the scrap heap, that tells me the kind of eye for talent that you can identify. When you're looking late in the game, you're looking at summer to bring in just another arm for camp, and you find somebody like that, that's pretty good. Guy went 2-0 in the starts. Didn't do a whole lot in those starts, but went 2-0. I like that. And I like that this is a connection that right away Iowa went to. Hank Brown appeared to be having a good time. Talked to some people that saw him at halftime walking through the concourse. A lot of Hawkeye fans were coming up trying to get him to be there. We'll see. And that's not alone. Iowa also had a couple other guys in on visits this weekend. They got one coming up this weekend as well. So there's a lot happening here. There's a lot going on with this Iowa football program in the transfer portal, is they're going to continue to do the work. And Kitchen, the defensive lineman from Northwest Missouri State, he also is going to be making here. Here's another exciting one that happened just a little bit ago, is a wide receiver making his way to campus, and Trayvon Rudolph from Northern Illinois. He was an all-MAC player. I was not going to turn down talent. And I think one thing you're seeing, so quarterback, yes, Iowa needs quarterback, maybe quarterbacks. Wide receiver, absolutely. Offensive tackle, it's going to be tough. You know, the question that I have is if Iowa believes Jennings Dunker can flip over to the left tackle position. If they believe he can do that, I think that changes things. But if he, because of his size and with the speed, they see him just only as a right tackle, are you looking at a left tackle? Do you believe enough in the young guys like a Trevor Lauk that he's going to be ready to go at the left tackle position? So you have that component. But when you look at the wide receivers that Iowa is looking at, for the most part, there are a couple of big receivers, but it's mostly guys that are speed elements. And Iowa needs that because big receivers, they have it. They got big dudes. Reese Vanderzee coming back with what you'd hope is a healthy sophomore campaign. You got big receivers like Howard, Bowie, both those guys, big physical guys. Jacob Gill is just a good, solid, kind of number two. You don't want Jacob Gill to be your number one. He was your number one. But if you find that speed component, they have speed in Seth Anderson, guy just can't stay healthy. A guy like Rudolph, I think that is intriguing. So they're continuing to work. And couple of guys from Miami of Ohio, defensive tackle Pace, along with Rankin, the long-armed cornerback, 6'8" wingspan. Those are guys that they're currently bringing in on visits. They're doing the work here. And we saw the metric that was put out by On3 that Iowa is doing pretty well. Now, they're not Ohio State. They don't have $20 million a year to spend, but Iowa's doing pretty well as it pertains to some of their brethren in terms of NIL funding. You have to continue to donate to the Swarm. You can complain, you can whine, but it's the new reality. That's where we are. Like to see Iowa continue to path into this, and we're going to have you covered coming up. We got one more podcast coming up this week. We'll have Tom Caker from Hawkeye Report. He covers all this stuff over at On3. We'll get his perspective on some things, get you set for the weekend, and a whole lot more as we continue to make it through the transfer portal. Hank Brown, many people believe it is a foregone conclusion. He is going to be making his commitment. That's going to be happening very soon. When that happens, we will be here with you with an instant reaction to that. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. And don't forget, it's not just Locked On Hawkeyes across the network. We have you covered. Maybe you're a long-suffering Bears fan, hand raise. Maybe you're a Vikings fan, Packers, Chiefs, or any other NFL team. NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, your team every day. We got you covered on that front, and not just your team specifically. Big picture. Craig Sheeman, Locked On Big Ten. He's got you covered there, talking all things Big Ten. Locked On NFL, Locked On Bets, Locked On Fantasy Football, all over the place, and we got to hear for you on the Locked On Network. Thanks for making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Go Hawks.